Okay. So, we're going to start in Acts chapter 12, verse 1. And we're talking about, we're switching the story a little bit. We were talking a little bit about, Paul and Barnabas and how Barnabas went to go get Paul, or Saul, if you will. And then all of a sudden the story switches, and now we're talking about some other people. So we're not talking about Saul/Paul and Barnabas right now at this moment. We will hear about them at the very end for a brief moment, but then it goes back into talking about Saul and Barnabas next chapter. So here we are, going on a side tangent is what's happening. Luke is doing that for us, and every time he goes on a side tangent, it kind of, really works with my personality, so that's fine. I'm okay with it. So just keep aware that there's multiple things happening. Luke is trying to record this stuff, and so we're switching the story. We were just talking about Saul and Barnabas, and now we're switching it a bit, and we're going to talk about Peter a little bit, and also James just for a moment, and some other people that would be important for us to know in Christian history. All right, are you guys ready? Verse 1. About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. Now, to be clear, this is Herod Agrippa I. Okay, I think there are 4 Herods that are mentioned in the Bible. This would be in chronological order, this would be about the third one that is talked about. He was the grandson of Herod the Great, okay, which was the one that we hear about during Jesus' time, as well as the nephew of Herod Antipas, which is the one that was part of when Jesus got crucified. He was leading then. And so this is the next Herod, okay? So every time you hear Herod, just think it might be more than one guy, okay? There's more than one Herod. This is Herod the Agrippa I, and he led and was the king of Judea from 41 to 44 AD, okay? For all you historians, you got some information, okay? Ready? Verse 2. He killed James. We're talking about Herod Agrippa I. He killed James, the brother of John. Now, this is not the brother of Jesus, and it's likely also not the author of the book of James, okay? So just to be clear, it's not proved, but most scholars say that he is not the James that wrote James. He's not the author of James, okay? So he killed him with the sword. Verse 3, and when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of unleavened bread. Okay? So make a couple notes here. He killed James. He saw the pleasure, if you will, on the Jews' face over what just happened. So because of that, he decided to also arrest Peter. Okay? Then it continues to say that this happened during the days of unleavened bread, which is a festival. We'll talk about that in a second, okay? Herod was willing to kill people, ready, to gain political power and favor. See, he didn't simply look at the Jews and say, oh, I really believe in what you believe. I really want to honor you in that way. No, he looked at it as some type of political force to help him politically in his kingship, okay? So if that's true, it was probably due to the fact that he wanted to continue to rise and didn't want other people to rise instead. He probably felt that these radical Christians were going to rise into some type of political power that could threaten his kingship. Okay? So it's likely that those two things were motivating to him. One, he was maybe nervous because they had a movement. Christians started having this movement. Multitudes came to know the Lord and started acting like they knew the Lord. And so, there was some big moves being made for Christians, and that might have made him a little nervous or uneasy. And also the other one was that the Jews also had some decent power and influence, so if he could get them on their side, on his side, that could be good and beneficial for him as well. So, after this happens, he realizes that it pleased the Jews, and that would give him, and so because of that, he realized that would give him favor from their party. There's a lot of things I can say, but what I'm going to try to do is not say them yet. All right, so what really catches me off guard, though, what really catches me off guard is that this happened during the time of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay? Now hear me out. Hear me out. This feast was right after the Passover. Unleavened bread comes right afterwards, right? So the Passover happens, then 7 days after that, that's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, so we understand how it works. And during these 7 days, the Jews are supposed to remember God saving them from Egypt and freeing them from 400 years of slavery. That's what it's for. Right now, why was it unleavened bread? Because they were in such a hurry, right, that they didn't have time to use yeast or for it to work, and so they had to take this unleavened bread and run because it was time to go, right? And so they eat unleavened bread during these 7 days, and they try to remember that this is what happened, that God freed them from slavery of 400 years. And the unleavened bread is a reminder that like they didn't even have enough time to let it prove. They had to pick it up and they had to go, right? Like it was like they had to move in haste. And it shares that in the Bible several different spots. Okay, so the Passover was the one that happened before that, and this is to commemorate and remember that the angel of death was passed over Jewish homes because they had the lamb's blood that was over the door. Okay, so you have this Passover, and it's like, yeah. So they passed before they were freed from slavery, right? They escaped death because of this lamb's blood that was put over their door. Okay, number one. Then unleavened bread happens right after that, which is a reminder to us, or to the Jews, right, that they were freed from 400 years of slavery hastily, right? It came pretty quick. So, interesting. So instead of remembering and celebrating what God has done for them, they are out celebrating the death of Christians while denying the actual Savior Jesus from coming to earth to save the whole world from their sin and giving Jesus as the ultimate lamb to be sacrificed. In that moment, they're missing that was a prophecy for Jesus to come. So Jesus is there. They're denying Jesus, and in the same exact moment, they're supposed to be celebrating what God did, but instead they're killing Christians because of Jesus, whom was crucified. Are you following? They should be celebrating God, and instead they're celebrating the death of the people that are following the Messiah, the true Messiah. There's a lot to unpack in that understanding, but this is what I will say to encourage you, I hope. I want to encourage you to make sure you're praying for the lost. Pray for the spiritually blind, and pray for the misguided. We can see here that these Jews had all this information. They've been studying the Torah forever. They've been doing all these things, but the Messiah and Christians following this Messiah were right in front of them, and they did not get it. And so I would just say, there's still people today that just don't get it. And it's not necessarily their fault. So I'd ask you to continue to pray, because they could be just lost, they could be spiritually blind, or they could have been simply misguided, right? And so be praying for them, be thinking about them, be reaching out to them, and caring for them. Let's continue. Verse 4. And when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people. So Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church. So quick note here, just to be clear, we're talking about Herod grabbing Peter still. I know I said a lot in between, but that's still what we're talking about. And it says, so Peter was kept in prison, and it is likely that the prison, let me just tell you what the prison kind of was like. So there's a prison that you kind of walk into a room, and it's already pretty dark, but it's this room. And then there's a hole in the ground, and in this hole in the ground, that is where people were kept in if you will, like real life purgatory, because they were about to go get excommunicated or be on trial or something. So they get stuffed in the ground, right? And there was a room down, which was like usually very damp. It was very cold, and it was very dark. And so that's where Peter went. Okay? So it's likely that is the type of prison that he was in. And it says, so Peter was kept in prison, so imagine that's what it kind of looks like. But earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church. I love this. First of all, what was it? Earnest prayer. Second of all, who was it made by? The church. Okay? We are held responsible to be earnestly praying for our brothers and sisters. Okay? So it's important for us to know that when something bad happens or when somebody is going through turmoil in life, we should be minimum earnestly praying by their side. Okay? So if something's going on and you have the heart that says, oh, well, what can we do? Then I'm just asking you to check yourself. Because we are called as the church primarily to lift our brothers and sisters up in prayer. That's one of our main things to do for each other. Okay? All right. So, how just ask yourself this question, like, how are we doing with that? Ask yourself, not everybody else. Focus on yourself. How are you doing with that? Are we willing to earnestly be praying for our brothers and sisters? Or is it hard to believe that it even would make a difference? There have been times where something pops up and I have the opportunity to pray for somebody. And what I think to myself sometimes is, it's probably not going to help. This prayer probably won't help, right? It's for sometimes there's situations where you think it's really hard for you to believe that something's going to change or something's going to happen. I want to say, well, who are we praying to and what can he do? Good questions to ask. Who are we talking to and what can he actually accomplish? And hopefully we'll unravel some of that as we go. Let's go to verse 6. Now when Herod was about to bring him out, this is Peter, on that very night, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers bound with two chains. And sentries before the door were guarding the prison. And behold, okay, so lots of people watching Peter. Okay, there's lots of stuff going on. He literally has two guys that are like chained to him. And then he has two other guys that are watching him at least. All right, this is minimum of what is shown. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. Remember? In the cell that's probably very dark. All right? And a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him, saying, "Get up quickly." And the chains fell off his hands. Now, let me be clear here. The struck here is translated as a forceful blow. He wasn't like, "Peter, we got to go. They're about to wake up." No, he was like, "Bam! Peter, let's go. We got to go. Let's go." Right? It literally is translated from forceful blow. Okay? This angel was not messing around. Okay? He was on a mission and he wanted to accomplish it. Okay? He was probably sent by God to do this mission. He wanted to accomplish it. The Lord said, "Do this thing." And he said, "Okay." So he's like, "Bam, Peter, get up quickly. We got to go." So Peter's like, pfft. I mean, have any of you guys ever been slapped awake? If you did, I have a lot of other questions. But my assumption is it would give you a jolt of energy and wonder what is going on and be a little lost. Maybe. Maybe you're a little shook up. I don't know. Okay? So then the angel said to him, "Dress yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so, and he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he went out and followed him. He did not know that what he was doing, or what was being done by the angel, was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. See, Peter had seen God move in miraculous ways before. Can we agree? But for whatever reason, this for him was hard to believe. Right? So the angel is making a way, and he's like, this has got to be another vision. There's no way this is actually happening because it's pretty impossible to happen. Two guys were chained on me. All these people are watching. I'm down in this cellar in the ground. This isn't happening. There's no way I'm getting out of here easy. Right? So for him, it was probably hard to believe. When they had passed the first and the second guard, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. Now, it doesn't say how they passed this guard. Like, I don't know what actually happened. I know that my theology says that perhaps the angel could have appeared as a man. I know that he could have maybe walked past him. Maybe when he covered himself in his cloak, he covered his face as well, so he just looked like a prisoner being led somewhere. Maybe for whatever reason, there was divine blindness and they didn't see them. I don't know. But what I do know is that they walked past them. Okay? So God made a way when there wasn't truly a way. So yeah, when they had passed the first and the second guard, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them of its own accord. Can you imagine? You don't have to say open sesame. You don't have to give the password. You don't have to knock a certain way. It just opened. It just simply opened. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel left him. This angel's job was over. He did what he was called to do, he accomplished the mission, and he went back home. Or on to the next mission, right? So here he is. I'm just going to pause really quick to say, sometimes when the Lord is leading you into something, or out of something, it may feel like there will be no way to get through whatever that is, into it or out of it. And I want to say, here in this way, this is a real example of I'm going to be honest, this was a little hard to believe. If you heard about this in real life, in modern day society, you'd be like, okay, those soldiers were paid lots of money. They're working with somebody, you're going to rationalize that like crazy, because there should be no way that a person who just walks past guards and walks free, right? And then you're telling me that they get to this iron gate and it magically opens. I'm telling you, somebody was on that button, right? Somebody was like, I'm opening it. Yep. That's like $100,000 open, worth it, right? In today's day and age, that's what we would think, right? We'll definitely try to rationalize it out a bit. Or would I be the only one? Would I be the only one to try to rationalize it? Okay. Here's the thing. Before I get there, let's do verse 11. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all the Jewish people and all that the Jewish people were expecting." See, the Jewish people were expecting maybe death, just like James got killed. See, it may have been hard to believe, but it made sense to him afterward. And just like what I was just talking about, for you as well, I want you to hear me out. Sometimes when God is doing something, you will have doubts. You will begin to try and rationalize what is happening. You will want someone to pinch you. You will think you are dreaming, and you won't believe it. There are things that will happen in your life that will happen to you like that. But afterwards, if you are honest with yourself, you will realize God had a hand in it. Because there is actually no other way to explain it. All right? If you are honest with yourself. Remember, God is known for doing the impossible, and He can do it in your life too. If we read through the Bible, we see that God continued to do the impossible things over and over and over again. But when it happens to our life, we're like, well, it's in the book, but He doesn't really do that anymore. I haven't really seen it. It doesn't really happen. We don't really need miracles anymore, so He doesn't actually do miracles anymore. Right? We'll explain it away. Right? And I'm just saying, the same God that I see in the Bible is an unchanging God. And therefore, since He is unchanging, I am assuming He probably is the same today as He was yesterday. And my assumption is also He'll be the same tomorrow. And I'm thankful that I can say that because it gives me some type of security in knowing what God I am serving versus a God that changes every 10 days and you got to try to figure it out. Right? I'm thankful for our God's faithfulness and truth to Himself. Being true to Himself. Verse 12. When he realized this, so when he finally realized this really just happened, like he had to get all the way out the prison. He had to walk past all these guards. After this angel smacked him, right? All the way out, this door opened, he gets out, this angel leaves, and all of a sudden he's like, Now what? I'm actually here, so now what? When he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, which is the mother of John, whose other name was Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. So, it's probably safe to say, in my opinion, these people were probably still praying for Peter as they were already praying earnestly for him. Right? It says that he shows up where many were gathered together and were praying. My assumption is that they were still praying for Peter. That's an assumption. But my assumption is most people don't necessarily stay up all night and pray together in gatherings, right? So I have this kind of assumption that they were probably still praying for Peter. So, when he knocked, verse 13, and when he knocked at the door of the gateway, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. Ready? Recognizing Peter's voice, in her joy, she did not open the gate. I can talk about some things here. All right, but ran in and reported that Peter was standing at the gate. Ready? Ready for this? Have you ever been so full of joy that you really aren't thinking straight? Have you ever had something so cool happen that you kind of forget parts of what maybe you should do, or what would be appropriate, or what manners look like, or what you've been taught your whole life, or, whatever, because of this thing? Well, in this case, I think Rhoda gives us a very humorous example of this. She's probably praying for Peter in this moment. Peter knocks on the door, right? And when Peter knocks on the door, she's like, "It's Peter!" And instead of opening the gate, she goes to tell everybody else, "We've been praying, and he's here!" It worked, Man, what was this girl doing? Like I said, I've definitely met people that have done stuff like this or whatever. They're just so excited that they're yeah. So, I was so excited to be here this morning. Right? Got all my stuff, grabbed everything, and you know what I forgot? My tablet. You know where my sermon is? On my tablet. So, I was so excited to be here and all this stuff, and I start coming, and I'm like, where's my iPad? So we stopped the car, we looked in the car, we realized it wasn't in there, we drove another, 30 feet. I'm like, no, I grabbed it. I opened it up again, we stopped again, we opened it up again, I looked, nothing. I'm like, so we turned around, we went home, and it's sitting on my steps, which is right next to my door outside. So I forgot it. I was so excited, full of joy to be here with you this morning, that I forgot my iPad and had to turn around. So in the same way, but way cooler, Rhoda turns around. All right, are we ready? They said to her, "You are out of your mind." All right? But she kept insisting that it was so, and they kept saying, "It is an angel." See, they were praying earnestly for Peter, right? But God actually answering their prayer was hard to believe. Right? So they were earnestly praying. They were spending time together. They were praying. They wanted something to happen for Peter, so they were petitioning God so something could change in Peter's life. But then it does, and they're like, "You are out of your mind." Right? Have you ever prayed for something and God actually answered, and you're like, "Yeah, right. There's no way that actually happened." I have definitely some stories about how God has moved in my life that I said, "God, no way. I don't believe it," right? But it's possible. So, they say, "You are out of your mind." They couldn't believe it. They said, "No way, it is just his guardian angel. No way, it is actually him." Okay? There's no way. There was a belief that at that time, under some religious folks that believed that each person had their own guardian angel. I mean, people still have that belief, right? That we all have, or some of us have our own guardian angel. And Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I don't really see that in the Bible. It shows like Mike has Archangel Michael, and and then you guys, whatever. I'm just saying, like, we don't necessarily see that factually, biblically, but it also doesn't say we factually don't necessarily see that either. So who knows? But they had this belief that individuals had a guardian angel. So what they assumed was, no, it's not Peter, it's his guardian angel, is what I'm understanding from my studies. And so they're like, whatever, they would prefer to believe that a spiritual being was knocking on the gate than Peter showing up. See, it's more probable for the angel to show up than it was for Peter for them, right? They were like, you are out of your mind. There has definitely been people that have said stuff to me, and that was kind of my response. All right. Verse 16, but Peter continued knocking like, hello, it really is me. Can I come in, please? And when they opened, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, like, I don't know, like in America, we might be like, I don't know if he was like, I don't know. I don't know what was happening, but he probably felt that maybe some people were looking for him. And maybe he didn't want them to be in danger as well. I don't know the exact reason why, but he did say, hey, can we keep it down? He described to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison and said, tell these things to James and to the brothers. Then he departed and went to another place, gave some information, and left. Let's continue in verse 18. Now when day came, there was no little disturbance among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. Now, to be clear, this means there was a lot of disturbance. No little disturbance means a lot of disturbance. Okay? So there was a lot of disturbance among the soldiers over what had become of Peter. And after Herod searched for him and did not find him, he examined the sentries and ordered them that they should be put to death. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and spent time there. Now, just so you know, it was an act of disobedience or not doing your job. If you let a prisoner go for free, you were going to die. Your life was on the line to guard whoever was in that prison. And since Peter left, what was the outcome? They had to die, right? So that's why they died. It's actually like a rule. Verse 20, now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon. I didn't skip it. And they came to him with one accord, and having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they asked for peace, because their country depended on the king's country for food. Here, it is likely that Herod controlled their food supply. Okay? He was the king of this area. He decided to control their food supply. And he may have allowed less food to go there or into these cities because they weren't contributing, in his opinion, their fair share to his kingdom. Or something else was going on, right? But somehow, these people had to depend on Herod to make sure they're getting enough food. Okay? So did you know that they could have done that? They could have said, okay, so the food supply that's going over to Tyre, let's just give them 50%. 50% of what they should need, okay? And have them figure it out until they start bringing in their fair share. Also, why don't you do that with Sidon too, since they're acting similarly? But let's make it 40%. I don't know, but he did ration their food, it seems. Verse 21. On an appointed day, Herod put his royal robes, took his seat upon the throne, and delivered an oration to them. And the people were shouting, ready? These people that he was talking to, they were shouting, the voice of God and not of a man. Right? What were they saying? They were saying that what was coming from Herod's mouth was godly. That he was a god to them. That the voice that he was using was a god. Right? Not that God was using him as the mouthpiece, but he was a god. Right? Not necessarily capital G, God, but at least a lowercase g, God. One of some others, right? So, what happens then? Well, here Herod is receiving such high praise and worship by saying that he is a god. What could have Herod done with that information? We see that when Peter went to Caesarea and he came before Cornelius, Cornelius bowed down and worshipped him. And he said, "Get up, I am just a man." Do not do that. What did Herod do? Did he also do the same thing? Immediately, verse 23, an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last breath. But the word of God increased and multiplied. So, God doesn't do things for no reason. Okay? Can we be clear about that? God doesn't flippantly flip books and point and say, that's what we're going to do. He doesn't do anything without a reason. We don't always understand the reason, but God is not a God that does things without reason. God struck Herod Agrippa down because he did not give God glory. He wanted people to worship him, meaning Herod wanted people to worship him. And that would have taken people away from worshiping God, and God was not happy about that. From all the evil and unrighteous things that happened under Herod's kingship, it may be hard to believe that anything good could come from it. Right? Want to talk about political powers in America? I'm sure we could say, depending on who the candidate is, nothing good can come from it. Nothing good can come from it. And so I pray that this is challenging. Even though there are better candidates and worse candidates, who's really on the throne? Really? It may have been hard to believe that anything good can come from it. However, regardless of the way Herod led, the gospel of Jesus' death and resurrection for the forgiveness of sins continued to increase and multiply. We see this in verse 24. It said, even though all this stuff, he gets struck down, but the word of God increased and multiplied. God's will be done. Right? Continue to pray that the Lord's will be done regardless of good or bad leaders. Ultimately, we should look for him to be on the throne and not necessarily wonder about other things as well. So the last verse in this chapter, and this is where we're closing up, will lead us into next week's message as the story switches back from Peter, and we did talk about James for a moment, and Herod, getting back to talk about Saul and Barnabas, and some of the journey that they were on together. This is what it says. It says, and Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had completed their service, bringing with them John, whose other name was Mark, which is, we were just talking about John Mark earlier. I just want to say, so next week we'll be moving into Saul and Barnabas. So now moving back. Ultimately, the reason it is hard for us to believe things that are irrational, hard or impossible to prove, or difficult to explain is that if it was true, ready? Are you hearing me? If it was true, if we actually believed it, if we were willing to take the time to consider the reality of what that would mean, it would cause something inside of us to want to change because there is a real God out there that is all-powerful, all-knowing, and ever-present. That decided we were good enough, right, to restore into right relationship with Him. So if these things that are really hard to believe, if we were to dare say, I can't actually figure it out, I can't rationalize it, and we would actually say, yeah, God's hand must be in it. If we have that reality of understanding there's a God out there that is all-powerful, all-knowing, ever-present, then it has to make us say, if so, then what do I do? If so, if that is true, how do I respond to that? How do I act? How do I live my life? Because if that were true, if there's an all-knowing God, an ever-present God, an all-powerful God, that it will live forever, and He's inviting me into relationship to live with Him forever, how much does this world matter? And are we living for this world or the next? Because like I always say, we might live to be 80, 90, 100, right? Let's say 110 if we've been blessed with extra years to be here. That is no comparison to eternity. And so we see here that God loves people to point people to Him, not to themselves. And so while we're here on this earth for the next however many years, will we be pointing people to us, or to other things, or to God? And we have to make that choice. And this is the sentence in which I will end with, is this. Just because it's hard to believe doesn't mean it isn't true.